Walter Brooks was 41 years old, and until that Friday morning, he believed he had built something real. A 7-figure architectural firm, a 9-year marriage, a life assembled brick by brick from nothing. Because where Walter came from, nothing was exactly what you started with. He drove a modest car, wore no jewelry, let his work speak for him. To most people, he looked like a man of comfortable means and quiet habits. To his wife, Diane, he had started to look like a man she could afford to leave behind. Walter had been noticing things, small things, a phone placed face down, laughter behind closed doors, a question she never used to ask. Where is the money, exactly? So on that Friday morning, Walter sat across from Diane at their kitchen table and told her he had lost everything. The investment deal had collapsed. The firm was exposed. They might lose the house. He watched her face as he said it. She said all the right words, but her eyes were already doing the math. 24 hours later, Walter was sitting in a parked car across the street from a Buckhead restaurant, watching his wife kiss another man through a lit window. What Walter did next, Diane never saw coming, and neither did anyone else. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The blueprints were spread wide across Walter Brooks's drafting table, held flat at the corners by 2 steel weights and a ceramic mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The lines on the paper were clean and precise, the kind of work that took years to make look effortless. Walter's pencil moved in slow, deliberate strokes as he checked the load calculations for the 3rd time. Not because he doubted them, because he never submitted anything he hadn't checked 3 times. That was simply how he was built. The office was quiet in the way good offices get quiet on a Thursday afternoon. The phones had slowed, the junior architects had their heads down, and the low hum of the city outside the glass was distant enough to feel like something else, something almost peaceful. From the small Bluetooth speaker on the corner of his desk, a guitar moved through a slow blues melody. B.B. King, maybe, or one of the men who learned from him. Walter didn't always need to know the name, he just needed the sound. On the wall above his desk hung 2 things. One was a framed photograph, his mother, Loretta Brooks, in her nursing scrubs, standing in front of a house Walter had bought her when he was 34. She was smiling in that specific way she had, the smile that meant, "I always knew." She had been gone 6 years now, and Walter still looked at that photo every single day. The second thing on the wall was a blueprint, framed under glass, edges yellowed. It was the schematic for a small community center in East Memphis, the first project he'd ever been commissioned to design, back when his entire firm was 1 man, 1 laptop, and a folding table in a rented room. The building was still standing. He'd driven past it once, a few years ago, just to see. He hadn't told anyone he did that. Walter had grown up poor enough to know the weight of things. His mother worked double shifts at the hospital for most of his childhood, and she never once complained about it in front of him. Not in a way that asked for pity. She just worked. And Walter, watching her, learned that the most important things a person built were never loud about themselves. He carried that with him into everything. His firm now held municipal contracts across 3 states. The office occupied the entire 14th floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta. He employed 21 people, all of them good at their jobs, all of them paid fairly. He drove a 6-year-old Volvo with 1 small dent above the rear tire. He wore no watch, no rings, nothing that caught light or invited comment. He let the work announce him, and the work had been doing that just fine for 15 years. He and Diane had been married 9 years. The house was in a good neighborhood east of the city. Brick exterior, tall windows, a backyard with a stone patio he'd designed himself. They took vacations, Savannah, Martha's Vineyard once, a long weekend in New Orleans that Diane still talked about warmly. There were 2 cars in the driveway. dinners at decent restaurants on weekends, a guest room that they'd meant to do something with for years and never quite had. The surface of a good life, a real one even. He had loved her. He wanted to be clear about that, at least inside his own mind, where it still mattered to be clear. He had loved her the way a man loves something he worked to deserve, but something had shifted. He could not have told you exactly when it started, only that one day he noticed she was putting her phone face down on the counter, and he realized he could not remember when she had started doing that. The phone had always just sat wherever she set it. Now, it was always face down. Small things, the way she laughed on calls she took in the bedroom with the door pulled most of the way shut. The lateness, not dramatic lateness, nothing that demanded an argument, just 30 minutes here, an hour there, adding up over weeks the way water adds up in a slow leak. Her energy when she came home was different too. Not sad, not guilty, exactly. Distracted, like a person mentally living somewhere else. Walter noticed all of it. He didn't say anything. That was important to understand about him. His silence was not weakness, and it was not denial. He was not a man who confused motion with action. He had learned, from years of structural work, that you did not go pressing on walls before you understood where the load was sitting. You observed. You mapped. You moved only when you were certain, and only in the direction that mattered. He was not certain yet, but he was close. At 6:43 in the evening, he pulled the Volvo to the curb half a block from their house and cut the engine. The sky had gone the color of old copper. Through the living room window, he could see the warm yellow light of the lamp Diane always turned on first when she got home. A shadow moved across it, her shape unhurried, comfortable. Walter sat with his hands in his lap and watched the light. He thought about what he knew. He thought about what he didn't. He thought about the difference between those two things and how much it still cost a man, sitting in the quiet, to admit they weren't the same. Then he made a decision. Walter had been awake since 4. He didn't toss. He didn't stare at the ceiling in any dramatic way. He simply lay there in the dark with his eyes open, running through it all one more time. The way he reviewed load calculations, the way he checked and rechecked before he ever committed a line to paper. By the time the sky outside the window began to go gray, he had it all arranged neatly inside himself. What he was going to say, how he was going to say it, what he was going to watch for. He heard Diane's alarm at 7. He was already downstairs. He sat at the breakfast table with his coffee in front of him and let it go cold on purpose. That was a detail. Details mattered. A man who had just received devastating news did not carefully manage the temperature of his coffee. He sat with his elbows on the table, his shoulders slightly forward, and he waited for her footsteps on the stairs. She came down in her robe, hair loose, moving with the easy comfort of a woman in her own home. She went to the coffee maker first, poured a cup, then turned and saw him sitting there. "You're up early," she said. Walter looked up at her. He let the look sit on his face, a half-second longer than usual, just enough. "Couldn't sleep," he said. She studied him for a moment. He watched her notice something in his posture, something in the flatness of his voice. She came and sat across from him at the table, wrapping both hands around her mug. "What's wrong?" he told her. He built it carefully, not too fast, not too rehearsed. He talked about the investment deal the way a man talks about something he is still processing, pausing in the right places, rubbing the back of his neck once. He told her his partner had cleared out, that the funds were gone, that his attorney was already looking at the exposure, but the numbers were bad, that they might need to look hard at the house, at what they could and couldn't hold on to while things got sorted out. He watched her face the entire time, and Diane was good. He had to give her that. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, and her brow came together in exactly the right way. Her voice was soft. "Walter, baby, I'm so sorry." She squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out. Whatever we need to do, we'll figure it out together. I love you." The words were right. Every one of them. A person listening from another room would have heard a devoted wife. But Walter was not listening from another room. He was sitting 18 inches from her face, and he had spent 15 years reading structures, understanding where the weight was truly resting, where the surface told the truth, and where it only looked like it did. Her eyes moved, just slightly, just once. It was the look of a person doing arithmetic. He kept his own face open, and tired and grateful. He nodded slowly at her words. He said, "I know. I know we will." He let her keep holding his hand. Then she asked, "How much is actually gone?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What do you need from me right now?" "How much?" Walter took a slow breath through his nose. He looked down at the table like a man who found the number hard to say. He gave her a figure. He watched her receive it. And in the small, careful silence that followed, he noted, with the same quiet precision he applied to everything, that the question had come before the comfort was even finished landing. He filed it away. He did not react to it. He got to the office by 9. He sat at his desk and sent a single text to his sister Rochelle at noon. "Can you meet Saturday morning?" My gut was right. Her reply came back in 4 minutes. "I'll make coffee. Come early." He put the phone in his drawer and went back to work. Diane called him at 5:30. Her voice was light, almost breezy, which was its own kind of tell. She'd forgotten to mention Patrice had been asking about getting the girls together, and tonight ended up working for everyone, and she was sorry for the short notice. She wouldn't be too late. Walter leaned back in his chair. "Of course," he said. "Go. You deserve a night out. You sure you'll be okay?" "I'm fine," he said. "I might just go to bed early anyway." When he got home, the house was empty. He went upstairs and found the bathroom still warm with the steam from her shower and the scent of her good perfume, the one she saved for things that mattered, hanging in the air like a question. A dress was discarded on the bed, the one she'd decided against, the one she'd put on first and then replaced with something better. He stood in the doorway of their bedroom for a moment. Then he went back downstairs, picked up his keys from the counter, and stepped out into the dark. The restaurant was called Seraph. Walter had never been inside it. He knew the building. A converted brownstone on the east side of Buckhead. Good bones, nice restoration work on the facade. He had driven past it 100 times without ever having a reason to stop. He was parked across the street now, engine off, lights off, sitting low in the seat of his modest gray Accord. The kind of car nobody looked at twice. Through the window, past the amber glow of the dining room, past the hostess stand with its single white orchid, he could see maybe a third of the tables. Dark wood, candles, the kind of lighting that was designed to make people feel beautiful and private. He had been there 4 minutes when he saw Diane come in. She was wearing the dress, the better one, the one she had chosen after discarding the first. It was deep green, and she moved through the room the way she always moved through rooms, like she understood exactly where the center of it was. The hostess led her toward a table near the far window. A man was already standing up. Walter had seen Felix Okafor before. Once, at an industry event 2 years ago, some charity function Diane had dragged him to. Felix was loud in the way certain men were loud, filling space with his voice and his laugh, and the performance of his own confidence. Walter had shaken his hand once, and forgotten him by the time the valet brought the car around. He was not forgetting him now. Felix stood and opened his arms, and Diane stepped into them, and he kissed her on the mouth. Easy, familiar, the way a man kisses a woman he has kissed many times before. Not a greeting. A habit. Walter raised his phone. He took 4 photographs. His hand did not shake. He sat there for another few minutes, not because he needed more evidence, but because some part of him, some stubborn and faithful part, was waiting for something to tell him he was wrong, that there was an explanation, that the image through the window meant something other than what it clearly meant. Nothing came. He started the car and drove home. The house was quiet when he got back. He didn't turn on many lights. He went to the kitchen, filled a glass from the tap, and sat down at the table. He thought about his mother, about the apartment in Memphis where he'd grown up, the way the kitchen light buzzed on cold mornings, the way she had ironed her uniform before the sun came up, twice a week for 20 years, without complaint. She used to say that you build honest, or you don't build at all. He had built honest. Every year of the marriage, every year of the firm, he had given it all the weight of something real. He sat with that for a long time. By the time the grief moved through him and settled somewhere quieter, the clock on the microwave read 12:03. He went upstairs, undressed in the dark, and got into bed. Diane came home at 1:17. He heard her heels on the hardwood downstairs, then her careful steps on the stairs, lighter than usual, trying not to wake him. The bathroom light came on under the door. The shower ran for 8 minutes. Then the light clicked off, and she slid into bed beside him, and he felt the warmth of her and the faint smell of the soap she'd used to wash away the perfume. Walter lay on his side, eyes open in the dark, breathing slowly, evenly, the way a sleeping man breathes. She settled. She was still within 2 minutes. He stared at the ceiling until morning. He made them both breakfast: eggs, toast, fresh coffee. He moved around the kitchen carefully and slowly, like a man still carrying something heavy, and Diane sat at the table and told him she'd had a good time and that it had been nice to get out of her head for one night. He said he was glad. He meant neither. After a while he set his fork down and rubbed the back of his neck and said that Arthur had called, that there were some immediate legal costs tied to the investment mess, and that he might need to pull against the joint account to cover them in the short term. Diane went still, just for a moment. "That account has had some movement already," she said. "I was going to mention it." Walter looked up. "What kind of movement?" She redirected. Said something about a transfer she'd made for a home expense, that she'd been meaning to move it back, that the timing had just gotten away from her. She topped off his coffee. She changed the subject. He let her. He waited until she left to run errands. Then he sat down at the desk in his home office and opened the joint account on his laptop. He read it twice. 2 transfers, 30 days apart, $22,000 and then $18,000. 6 weeks of clean, methodical movement, timed so that neither amount crossed the threshold that would trigger a bank notification. She had known exactly what she was doing. Walter sat back in his chair. He looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone, scrolled to a name, and pressed call. It rang twice. "Arthur," he said, when the line picked up. "It's Walter. I need you to move quickly and quietly. And I need to know everything she's touched." Rochelle lived 20 minutes from Walter, in a brick ranch house she had bought herself 8 years ago and renovated room by room on her own schedule. The kitchen was the best room in it. Wide windows, morning light that came in clean and yellow, a table big enough for 6 that she always kept set for 2. She was already at the stove when Walter knocked. She let him in without a word, poured him coffee without asking, and set a plate of toast in front of him that he did not touch. Then she sat down across from him and folded her hands and waited. Walter talked for 19 minutes. He laid it out the way he did everything, in order. The things he had noticed over the past few months, the decision to test her. Friday morning at the breakfast table, and the way Diane's eyes had moved when he said the word losses. The restaurant, the dress, Felix standing up from that table, the 4 photographs, Diane sliding into bed at 1:17 a.m. smelling like hotel soap. Then the account, the 2 transfers, the clean, careful spacing of. Rochelle did not move. She did not make a sound. She sat across from her brother with her hands folded and her jaw tight, and she listened to every word. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. She got up, walked down the hall to her bedroom. He heard a drawer open and close. She came back holding her phone. She didn't say anything right away. She sat back down and pulled up her photo library and scrolled for a moment. Not long, like she knew exactly where it was. Then she turned the screen around and set the phone flat on the table in front of him. Walter looked at the photo. It was a crowded room, a gala of some kind, people in formal clothes, cocktail glasses, a stage with lights behind it, and in the lower left of the frame, slightly out of focus, almost incidental, Diane, standing beside Felix Okafor. She was laughing at something. His hand was on the small of her back. Not a friendly hand, not a polite hand. The hand of a man who had already decided that he owned the right to be there. In the top corner of the image, the event venue's digital clock was visible. 8 months ago. Walter stared at it. He did not look away for a long time. "I was there with Carla Simmons," Rochelle said. "Her hospital's annual fundraiser. I turned around, and there they were. I told myself I was misreading it." Her voice was steady but thin at the edges. "I didn't want to blow up your life on a maybe, Walter." "You didn't blow up my life," he said. "She did." Rochelle pressed her lips together and nodded once. Walter sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at the photo. He did the math quietly in his head. 8 months ago. That meant the transfers from the joint account, 6 weeks ago, were not the beginning of anything. They were closer to the end. Whatever this was, it had been running for at least 8 months that they could document. Probably longer before that. The betrayal wasn't an impulse, it was a structure. It had a foundation. It had been built the same way everything was built. Slowly, deliberately, piece by piece, while he wasn't looking. "Walk me back," he said. "Everything you remember. Trips, stories she told. Anything that felt off." And Rochelle did. She talked for a long time, and Walter listened, and together they began to pull the thread. A weekend trip Diane had taken to Savannah last spring. "Girls' trip," she had said. But Rochelle had called her friend Vivian 2 days later about something unrelated, and Vivian had mentioned she hadn't seen Diane in months. A conference in Nashville that Walter had not attended. The way Diane had started carrying her phone differently, tucked against her body, always face down when she set it anywhere near him. A comment she had made at Easter about wanting more room to breathe, which had sounded like restlessness at the time, and now sounded like planning. They mapped 14 months of it across the kitchen table. Walter didn't write anything down. He didn't need to. He catalogued it the way he catalogued everything, precisely, permanently, filed somewhere behind his eyes where it would stay until he needed it. When they had gone as far back as they could, Rochelle refilled his coffee and said, "I know someone." He looked at her. "She does private financial work, forensics. She's careful, and she's fast, and she doesn't talk." Rochelle paused. "I've sent her 2 referrals in the past 3 years. Good woman. Her name is Petra." Walter nodded once. "Make the call." Rochelle picked up her phone. He drove home with the windows down and the city moving past him in the pale yellow of late morning. He went inside, walked past the kitchen without stopping, and sat down at the desk in his home office. He opened the top drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad. He uncapped a pen. He thought for a moment. Still, the way a man thinks, before he draws the first line on a blank page. Then he began to write. Arthur Dillard's office was on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown that had no signage on the street level. That was intentional. Arthur had chosen it 30 years ago for exactly that reason. His clients came to him with problems that required discretion, and discretion began at the door. Walter arrived at 9. The receptionist, a quiet man named Gerald, who had worked the desk for as long as Walter could remember, nodded and waved him through without a word. Arthur was already standing when Walter stepped into the office. He was a trim man, dark-skinned, with silver at his temples and wire-rimmed glasses he wore low on his nose. He was dressed the way he always dressed. Dark suit, white shirt, no tie. He did not smile. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, the way a doctor gestures to an exam table. "Come sit. We have things to discuss." "Coffee?" Arthur said. "I'm fine." Arthur sat down. He opened a manila folder on his desk, the only thing on an otherwise clean surface, and folded his hands on top of it. "I'm going to tell you what I found," he said, "and I need you to listen to all of it before you respond." Walter nodded. Arthur opened the folder. The first document was a property record. Arthur slid it across the desk without commentary and waited while Walter read it. It was a condo, Midtown Atlanta, purchased 6 weeks ago. The buyer of record was an LLC, Hargrove Holdings, which Walter recognized as a variation of Diane's maiden name. Registered in Georgia, filed 6 weeks ago. The secondary stakeholder listed on the LLC formation documents was Diane Brooks. Walter read it twice. He set it down. "Keep going," he said. Arthur pulled out the next page, a financial trace, clean, annotated in Arthur's precise handwriting in the margins. The $40,000 from the joint account transferred in 2 installments. The first installment had cleared 4 days before the LLC was filed. The second cleared 2 weeks later. The transfers weren't impulsive, Arthur said. They were timed. The first covered the filing fees and earnest money. The second was applied toward the down payment. Felix Okafor's name is not on the LLC. He's insulated on paper. But the purchase price on that unit and the income Arthur's record pulled from Okafor's registered business entities tell a story. He couldn't carry this deal without outside capital. He let that sit for a moment. "She wasn't waiting for you to fail, Walt. She was already gone. She just hadn't told you yet." The office was very quiet. 14 floors up, the city was a low murmur through thick glass. Walter did not move. He looked at the property record again. He thought about the building. He knew it, actually. He had driven past it dozens of times without ever thinking about it. 6 weeks ago, while he was sitting across from Diane at dinner, while he was carrying on full conversations with her about paint colors and weekend plans and whether they should renew the wine club subscription, she had already signed her name to a life that did not include him. "What else?" he said. Arthur allowed himself a small pause. Then he reached into the folder again. "Do you remember the post-nuptial agreement?" he said. It was not a question. Walter looked at him. "Yes. Diane signed it 7 years ago, during the business restructuring, when you folded the second firm into the primary practice." Arthur removed the document and set it on the desk. 12 pages. Walter's signature on the last page beside Diane's. Arthur had notarized it himself. "I drafted this. I know what it says. Every line of it." He tapped the cover page once with his index finger. "It is fully enforceable." Walter was quiet. "She has no claim on the firm. No claim on the investment accounts held under the practice's umbrella. The joint account she moved money from was marital. That's recoverable. And then some, because what she did constitutes dissipation of marital assets under Georgia law." Arthur's voice stayed even, flat and factual, the way a surgeon sounds when he is describing a procedure. She left herself almost no legal ground to stand on. "I'm not sure she remembered this agreement existed." "She didn't," Walter said. He said it with certainty. Arthur nodded slowly. "That is her problem now." He closed the folder and folded his hands on top of it again. "I need 2 more weeks. I want to file asset protection paperwork quietly, initiate the forensic audit through proper channels, and build the documentation on that undisclosed property into something airtight. If you move before those filings are in place, you lose leverage. If you wait, he paused, you lose nothing. And, in the meantime, Walter said, in the meantime, you're a husband going through a hard time. Arthur's expression did not change. Keep doing what you're doing. Walter stood. He extended his hand and Arthur shook it. Firm, brief, the handshake of two men who did not need to add words to things that were already understood. He was home by 6:15. The kitchen light was on. He could smell something cooking. He hung his jacket on the hook by the door, walked into the kitchen, and found Diane at the stove. She turned when she heard him. She smiled. "How was your day?" she said. Walter looked at his wife. He let one beat of silence pass, just one. And then he gave her a tired, grateful smile. "Getting through it," he said. "Smells good in here." She turned back to the stove. "Sit down. It's almost ready." He sat down at the table they had shared for 9 years. He folded his hands in front of him, and he waited. The kitchen was clean by 8 o'clock. Diane dried the last pan and set it on the rack while Walter finished his second glass of water at the table. He looked tired. He had looked tired for 5 days now, ever since she'd come downstairs on Friday morning to find him sitting there like someone had let the air out of him. She felt, watching him now, something she recognized as tenderness, not guilt. She had worked hard to make sure it wasn't guilt. He needed rest. She needed to make a call. "I'm going to get some air," she said. "Back porch." Walter looked up from the table. He gave her that same slow, worn-out smile that he had been giving her all evening. "I'm going to hop in the shower," he said. "Don't stay out too long. It's getting cool." She nodded. She waited until she heard him push back the chair and start up the stairs. Then she took her phone off the counter, slid open the back door, and stepped outside. The yard was dark and still. The neighbors' lights were off on the left side. A dog was barking somewhere down the block, far enough away to be just sound. Diane pulled her cardigan tighter and dialed. Felix picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you." His voice was warm, deep. The kind of voice that had a shape to it, that you could feel in your chest when the volume was right. "Hey." She stepped off the porch and walked toward the back of the yard, away from the windows. "He's in the shower." "Good." A brief pause. "How was dinner?" "Fine. Normal." She looked back at the house. The upstairs bathroom light was on. "He's holding up. I think he's still in shock about the investment thing." Felix made a low sound. Not quite sympathy. Something closer to impatience wearing sympathy's clothes. "Listen, we need to talk about the timeline." Diane felt her shoulders go slightly tight. "We've talked about the timeline." "I know. And I'm talking about it again." His tone shifted. Just a few degrees, but she felt it. "I need you out of that house, Diane. I need you with me. Not in 2 months, not when it feels right. In the next 30 days. She turned away from the house, faced the dark back fence. "Felix, I can't just—" "You can. You know you can." His voice warmed again. He was good at that. The adjustment was so smooth, she almost missed it. "I've got the place. We've got the place. We're just waiting on you to stop stalling." "I'm not stalling. You're still cooking dinner for him." It was said lightly, almost playfully. But it landed like a finger pressed into a bruise. "I have to be careful," she said. "The way I exit this matters. I need it to be clean, Felix. No blow-ups, no lawyers breathing down my neck before I'm ready. I know how to handle Walter." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then, "What does that mean?" "Before you're ready." "Ready for what, exactly?" She hesitated. "The account still has money in it," she said, lower now. "There's equity in this house. If I walk out too fast, I lose access to all of that before the proceedings even start." She paused. "I'm not leaving anything on the table." "Right." Felix's voice was smooth again. Agreeable, like a door swinging back open after being briefly, accidentally closed. "No, that makes sense. That's smart. I miss you, baby." I want this done. She felt the warmth of that move through her. She let herself believe it, the way you lean into a patch of sun on a cold day. Soon, she said. I promise. A few more weeks. 30 days, he said again, friendly, firm. The way someone reminds you of a deadline they have already decided is not negotiable. 30 days, she agreed. She stood in the yard for another moment after she hung up. The dog down the block had stopped barking. The house behind her was lit and still. Walter's shower was still running. She could see the faint steam from the bathroom window on the second floor, the frosted glass glowing pale yellow. She thought about the condo, the clean lines of it, the light in the mornings she had imagined, the version of her life she had decided she deserved. Felix pressing her to move faster could mean a lot of things. She chose to let it mean that he was hungry for her, that he wanted the life they were building together, urgently and fully. She walked back toward the house. Walter was already out of the shower when she came inside. He was in the kitchen getting a glass of water, his hair still damp, dressed for bed. He looked up when she came through the door. Cold out there, she said. Told you, he said. Quiet. Easy. No edge on it. She crossed the kitchen and pressed her hand flat against his chest. He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. I love you, she said. I just want you to know that. Whatever happens with all of this, I love you. Something moved through Walter's eyes, something she couldn't quite name. Thank you, he said, his voice low and steady. Thank you for being patient with me. I know this hasn't been easy. She kissed him once on the jaw and went upstairs. She was asleep by 10:15. Her breathing was even. Her face, in the dark, was smooth and untroubled. Walter lay beside her on his back. His hands were flat on the mattress at his sides. He stared at the ceiling. The room was dark and quiet and completely still. He did not close his eyes. His jaw was set. In his mind, he counted. 13 days. The days had a rhythm to them now. Walter had built the rhythm deliberately, the way he built everything, with intention, with patience, with an eye for what each piece was carrying. At home, he was the wounded husband. Outside of it, he was something else entirely. Dinner on Tuesday was salmon. Diane made it with the lemon caper sauce he liked. She poured wine and told him about a woman at her spin class who was going through a messy split from her business partner. And Walter listened and nodded and said that sounds exhausting in exactly the right tone. She laughed once, soft and warm. He refilled her glass. After dinner, he thanked her again. He had been thanking her every few days, spacing it out just enough that it felt genuine. I don't know what I'd do without you holding things together right now. She received it each time with a kind of quiet satisfaction, a slight settling of her shoulders, a small private smile. He watched that smile. He filed it away. Petra called on Wednesday of the first week. Her voice on the phone was the same as it always was, unhurried, precise, built for delivering information without editorializing. She told Walter the timeline was complete. Notarized copies were ready. The LLC filing, the 2 transfers from the joint account, the wire connected to the condo's closing costs. All of it mapped, all of it sourced, all of it documented with the kind of paperweight that does not bend in court. Thank you, Petra, Walter said. Of course. A brief pause. Walter, it's thorough. He understood what she was telling him. Not that she had done good work. He already knew that. She was telling him that what Diane had done was thorough too, methodical, premeditated over a long stretch of time. The documentation proved it beyond any reasonable question. I know, he said. Send it to Arthur. He hung up and sat at his desk at the firm for a long moment. Outside his window, the Atlanta skyline sat clean and gray under a November sky. He picked up his pencil and went back to work. The condo building was on a Tuesday morning, just past 9. Walter drove there alone. He parked across the street and got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his coat pockets, looking up at it. It was a newer building, 12 stories, glass and steel, and the kind of clean, contemporary lines that photographed well, but told you nothing about what was actually holding the thing up. He had seen buildings like this before, had passed on projects like this before, in fact. The kind of structure that prioritized appearance over integrity. He read it the way he read all structures, starting from the base, working upward, understanding where the weight was sitting, where the pressure points were, what the whole thing actually depended on. 6th floor. That was where the unit was. He knew the number from Arthur's filing. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. He stood there for maybe 4 minutes. Then he got back in his car and drove to work. Arthur called Friday afternoon of the second week. "Everything is filed," Arthur said. "Asset protections are in place. The post-nuptial is documented and attached. The forensic report from Petra is logged." A pause. "The notification to Felix's lender goes out whenever you give me the word." "Hold it," Walter said. "Not yet. After the dinner." "After the dinner," Walter confirmed. Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then, "You sure you don't want me to handle the conversation? I can be there strictly as counsel." "I want you there," Walter said. "But I'll handle the conversation." Another pause. "All right." Arthur's voice carried something in it. Not quite pride, but close enough to its edges. "I'll be there Sunday." He told Marcus on Thursday. Marcus Webb had been with Walter's firm for 11 years. He was steady and sharp, and the kind of person who didn't need a full explanation to understand the shape of a situation. Walter pulled him into his office, closed the door, and told him simply that there was going to be some disruption in the next few weeks, personal in nature. He wanted Marcus to have full operational authority over the 2 active contracts during that window. Marcus looked at him for a moment. He didn't ask questions. "I've got it," he said. Walter nodded. "I know you do." That was the whole conversation. He wrote the letter on Saturday night. Diane was upstairs. The house was quiet. He sat at the desk in his home office with a single lamp on, and wrote in longhand, slowly, the way he drafted by hand before anything went to the board. He wrote what was true. He wrote what the 9 years had meant to him. He wrote what the discovery had cost him to carry in silence. He wrote what he needed her to understand about what she had done, not to his finances, but to the version of himself that had trusted her completely. He read it once. Then he folded it twice, cleanly along the creases, and slid it into the inside pocket of the jacket hanging on the back of the chair. He would not mail it. He would be standing in front of her when it mattered. Sunday came. That night, after Diane had gone to bed, Walter sat alone in his home office. The legal pad was on the desk in front of him. Arthur's last email was open on the screen. Petra's notarized timeline sat in a manila folder beside the keyboard. Everything in its place. He closed the legal pad. He straightened the pen beside it. The room was quiet. He was ready. The table looked good. Walter had set it himself that morning. The good plates, the cream-colored ones Diane had picked out during a trip to Savannah 3 years back. Cloth napkins folded into neat rectangles. The low centerpiece of white flowers he'd picked up without comment from the florist on Peachtree. Everything warm. Everything deliberate. Rochelle arrived first. A bottle of red wine in her hand, and a look on her face that she had carefully arranged into something that read as casual. She hugged Walter in the hallway and said nothing that mattered. He took her coat. She went to help in the kitchen. Arthur arrived 20 minutes later. Dark blazer. No tie. The leather folder under his arm looked, at a glance, like something a man brings to a dinner because he came from somewhere else and hasn't been home yet. Diane greeted him at the door with a warm smile. She had always liked Arthur. Found him distinguished in a quiet, old-fashioned way. "Arthur, so good of you to come," she said. "Wouldn't miss it," he said, and let her take his coat. He set the folder on the side table near the entry. Diane didn't look at it twice. Dinner was easy on the surface. Diane had cooked braised short ribs, roasted vegetables, a warm loaf of bread from the bakery she liked in Decatur. The food was good, and everyone said so. Rochelle asked Arthur about a case she'd read something about in the Atlanta Journal, and Arthur deflected it gracefully. And the conversation moved the way dinner conversation moves when the people at the table are performing normalcy for different reasons. Walter ate. He refilled glasses. He laughed once at something Rochelle said about a patient who had tried to self-diagnose using a cooking website. Diane caught his eye across the table and smiled. The warm, relieved kind of smile that said, "This is what I hoped for. You surrounded by people who love you, finding your footing again." He smiled back. Arthur said the short ribs were excellent. He meant it. When the plates were cleared and the table was down to water glasses and the low flicker of the candles, Walter set both hands flat on the tablecloth and looked at his wife. "Diane," he said, "can you sit with me for a minute?" It was not a question. She looked at him with something that flickered briefly before settling back into warmth. She sat. Rochelle stayed where she was at the far end of the table. Arthur reached to the side table without standing and placed the leather folder in front of him without opening it. Diane glanced at the folder, then back at Walter. Walter began to speak. His voice was even. Not cold. Even. The way a man talks when he has had a long time to decide exactly what he is going to say and has chosen every word with care. He told her he knew about Felix. He reached into the breast pocket of his blazer and placed the photographs on the table. The Buckhead restaurant. The dim lighting. Diane being walked to the table. Felix standing, leaning forward, his mouth against hers. Diane looked at the photographs and went very still. Walter placed Rochelle's gala photograph beside them, the timestamp in the corner of the frame. 8 months before that restaurant. Felix's hand on the small of her back, both of them laughing. 8 months, Walter said quietly. At least. He opened Arthur's folder and placed Petra's notarized timeline in front of her. 12 pages, clean columns, every transfer, every date, every wire amount mapped to its destination. The LLC filing. The condo in Midtown. Diane's name as a secondary stakeholder on a property purchased 6 weeks ago with $40,000 of their shared money. Diane's mouth opened. She closed it. "I also have the phone records," Walter said. 13 months, the home landline, the calls you made from this house, the ones billed to our joint account. He paused. "I've read them all." That was when she started talking. First, it was denial. "This isn't what it looks like, Walter. You don't understand the context." And he let her talk. Then, minimization. "It was nothing serious. It was a mistake. I was going to end it." And he let her talk. Then, the pivot. The one he had expected, her voice climbing slightly as she listed the ways he had failed to be present, failed to be exciting, failed to see her, and he let her talk. Then the tears came, quiet at first, and then less quiet, and she reached across the table toward his hand. He did not move his hand away. He simply did not extend it toward hers. He let her finish. When the room was quiet again, he spoke. "Arthur filed on Friday," he said. "The post-nuptial agreement you signed in 2016 is fully enforceable. Petra's documentation shows that the transfers from our joint account meet the standard for marital asset dissipation under Georgia law. You'll be required to account for every dollar." He watched her face as the full shape of it settled over her. The photographs, the records, the 2-week span of dinners and wine, and "I don't know what I'd do without you," and every single piece of it already documented, already filed, already done. He had never been broken. She understood that now. She understood it without him saying it. He could see the exact moment it arrived. Something in her eyes changing, a door closing behind them. Walter pushed his chair back and stood. He walked to the hall closet and took his jacket from the hanger. He put it on. His hands were steady. "Arthur's office will contact you Tuesday morning," he said. "You should get an attorney before then." He looked at her one last time. Then he walked to the front door and opened it. Rochelle stood from the table, picked up her coat from the chair beside her, and followed him without a word. The door closed behind them, quietly, the way a well-built door does, with a clean, final click, like the last line drawn on a finished blueprint. The house had never been so quiet. Diane sat at the dining room table for a long time after the door clicked shut. The candles had burned low. The water glasses still had water in them. The centerpiece of white flowers Walter had brought home, she hadn't even thought to ask where they came from, sat in the middle of the table like something left at a grave. She picked up her phone and called Felix. He answered on the third ring. His voice was smooth, unbothered, the way it always was, like nothing in the world could reach him. "Hey," he said. "Felix." Her voice broke on just that one word. "Walter knows everything. He had photographs. He had the account records, the LLC, the condo. Felix. He had a forensic analyst. He's already filed. His attorney." "Okay." Just that. "Okay. Did you hear what I said? He has everything. Your name is in the filing. The LLC, the transfers." "Diane." His voice had shifted. The warmth was gone. What was underneath it was not cold exactly. It was simply flat, like a dial turned all the way down. "I need you to handle this." She blinked. "Handle it? Felix? I can't have my name in a legal filing. I've got active deals. I've got lenders I'm in conversation with. If this gets attached to I used our money," she said. "The money we were going to use together. We bought that condo together." "I know." A pause. "You should have been more careful." The silence that followed was long and enormous. "So, that's it," Diane said. But Felix had already moved on. He was talking about his timeline, his exposure, what she needed to do to minimize the collateral. She stopped hearing him after a certain point. His voice became a kind of background noise, steady and self-interested, and entirely absent of anything that had ever resembled love. She hung up before he finished. She set the phone face down on the table and stared at the white flowers. She had believed he was urgent because he wanted her. She understood now that he was urgent because he needed what she was carrying. The money, the equity, the clean exit from his own quiet mess. She had not been a woman he chose. She had been a resource he was managing toward a finish line that was only ever his. She had traded 9 years of a real life for a transaction, and the transaction had just closed without her. What followed happened quickly and without mercy. Arthur's office sent a single, precise communication to Felix's primary construction lender. A notification that legal recovery proceedings had been initiated targeting funds connected to a jointly held property. The lender did not need to be told twice. They launched their own internal audit of Felix's holdings within 48 hours. The audit revealed what Felix had been careful to keep distributed and invisible: 2 pending lawsuits against development projects, a financing structure stretched far past what his assets could support, a pattern of borrowed capital used to maintain the appearance of a man who owed nobody anything. The lender froze his construction financing pending review. In Atlanta real estate, your financing is your heartbeat. When it stops, everything stops. A deal Felix had been cultivating for months, a mixed-use development in West Midtown, the kind of project that would have reset his position entirely, walked away inside a week. A second partnership dissolved quietly, 2 days after. The Midtown condo was flagged under the legal recovery order, its equity encumbered, untouchable until the proceedings concluded. The asset Felix had helped purchase with Diane's stolen money was now frozen inside a legal process he could not control and could not afford to be associated with. He stopped calling her first. Then he stopped responding to her calls. Then he stopped responding at all. Diane's brother Marcus called her on a Wednesday evening. He didn't announce it. No text, just a call. She almost didn't pick up. He had heard what happened. He told her plainly, in the measured tone of someone who had already processed his anger and arrived somewhere colder. He said he wasn't calling to fight. He said he'd spoken to their mother. That was all he needed to say. Her mother called the next morning. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. Diane's mother was not a woman who shouted. She was a woman who asked questions in a very particular way, carefully, one at a time. That was somehow worse than shouting. She asked about the account. She asked about the condo. She asked about Walter, whom she had always called a good man, in a voice that was trying hard to stay steady and not entirely succeeding. When they hung up, something between them had shifted. Not broken, but different. The kind of different that does not fully go back. Diane's attorney reviewed the full legal position over 2 appointments and delivered the same assessment both times. Settle. The post-nuptial agreement was airtight. Petra's documentation was notarized and comprehensive. The asset dissipation claim was strong. Fighting it would be expensive, slow, and very likely to make things worse. Diane agreed. She signed. She received her car, the furniture from the guest room, and a settlement figure her attorney described as the best available outcome under the circumstances. It was a fraction of what she had counted on. The calculation she had built her entire plan around, that Walter was asset poor, that the marriage had more to offer her than he did, had been precisely, completely wrong. She moved into the Midtown condo on a Thursday morning with 2 carloads of boxes and no help. By the end of that first week in the condo, Felix had stopped returning her calls entirely. She sat on the floor of the living room. The furniture she'd ordered hadn't arrived yet, with her back against the wall and her phone in her hand. The condo was clean. Good bones. South-facing windows that let in real light. Under different circumstances, she might have loved it. She had bought it with money that wasn't hers to take, for a future that had never existed, with a man who had only ever been counting. The phone in her hand was silent. The light came through the windows anyway, indifferent and bright, illuminating every empty corner of the room. 6 months is not a long time, but it is long enough. Walter's firm posted its best quarter in 15 years of operation. The number sat at the top of the financial report his office manager printed and left on his desk on a Monday morning, and Walter looked at it for a long moment before setting it aside and going back to the drawing he was working on. His senior architect, Damon, knocked on the glass and gave him a single nod through the window. Walter nodded back. That was enough. The municipal contract came through on a Wednesday. 2 years of proposals, presentations, revisions, and patience, and then a phone call, then a meeting, then a stack of papers on a conference room table that Walter signed in clean, unhurried strokes. The project was a mixed-use community development in a part of the city that had been waiting a long time for someone to build something worth keeping. Walter had wanted it because the work was real, because it mattered, because it was the kind of thing his mother would have driven past and felt something about. He signed the last page, shook the hand of the project director, drove home in his modest car with the windows down. Home was different now. The new house sat in a quieter neighborhood, about 12 minutes from the firm. It was smaller than the marital house by a third. Walter had designed it himself, not from scratch, but he had worked closely with the contractor, made specific choices about every room. The ceilings in the main living area were high enough to breathe. The windows faced east, so the morning light came in early and stayed. The kitchen was simple and functional. There was a drafting room off the back of the house with built-in shelving and a long oak table and exactly 1 chair. Every room was his. There were no compromises in the walls, no furniture chosen to impress anyone, no spaces designed for an audience. The house was quiet in the way that things are quiet when they fit the person living in them. His mother's photograph hung in the drafting room, same as always. She looked out from the frame with the steady expression Walter had been measuring himself against his entire life. Sundays belonged to Rochelle now. That was the new tradition. Dinner at her place, or sometimes at his, rotating without a fixed schedule, the way all good habits do when they stop needing to be enforced. She cooked things their mother used to make. He brought wine he'd actually thought about. They sat at the table longer than necessary, talking about work and neighbors and the small, ordinary mechanics of life, and occasionally, not always, but occasionally, about what had happened, in the easy, already processed way that people speak about something that is behind them rather than still chasing them. She still teased him. He still took it. He had not realized, until the marriage ended, how much of his emotional life he had been carrying alone. Rochelle had always been there. He had simply stopped leaning. He leaned now. It was not weakness. It had never been. Arthur took Walter to lunch on a Friday in late October. A quiet restaurant downtown. Good food. The kind of place where two people could have a real conversation without anyone nearby listening hard enough to matter. They talked business for a while, the contract, the firm's position, a few technical loose ends from the divorce proceedings that were now officially closed. Then Arthur set down his fork and looked at Walter with the specific expression of a man who has been waiting to say something and has decided the moment has arrived. "You know what your problem was?" Arthur said. Walter looked at him. "I imagine you're going to tell me." "Your problem," Arthur said, "was that you forgot the same thing that made you was also what protected you." He picked up his glass, turned it slightly. "You built everything quietly. No announcements, no performance. Nobody ever saw it coming, and nobody could take credit for it but you." He set the glass down. "That was always your advantage, Walter. You just forgot it applied to everything, not just the work." Walter sat with that. He turned it over the way he turned over a problem in a design, looking at it from different angles, checking where the weight was, seeing whether it held. It held. She never knew what she was actually standing next to, Walter said. It was not a question. "No," Arthur said simply. "She didn't." They finished their lunch. Arthur picked up the check without making a thing of it. They shook hands on the sidewalk outside, and Walter drove back to the new house and sat in the drafting room for a while without working, just thinking, the afternoon light shifting slowly across the oak table. He thought about Diane sometimes, not with anger. Anger had a short shelf life when you were busy building something. He knew, through sources that required no effort to maintain, that the condo felt smaller than she'd imagined, that the circles she'd cultivated across 9 years of being Walter Brooks's wife had a way of cooling when the marriage behind the name was gone, that her mother still called, but carefully, that Felix's name had gone quiet in the Atlanta real estate world in the specific way that names go quiet when the money behind them has been examined too closely. He did not dwell on any of it. He noted it the way an architect notes a failed structure, not with satisfaction, but with the clean, factual recognition that a thing built wrong will eventually show it. On a Sunday evening, after dinner at Rochelle's, Walter sat down at the drafting table in the light-filled room at the back of his house. Memphis blues played low from the small speaker on the shelf. His mother looked out from her photograph on the wall. The plans in front of him were for the community development project. Early-stage drawings, still loose, still finding their shape. He picked up his pencil. His phone buzzed on the corner of the table. He glanced at the screen. Something softened in his face. Not a full smile, but the quiet version of one, the kind that lives just beneath the surface of a man who has learned not to perform his happiness for anyone. He turned the phone face down, not because there was anything to hide, but because some things, the good things, the real things, don't need an audience. He picked up his pencil and got back to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out two more for you that I think you'll really like.